July 29th at 6:30. If you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. On the agenda tonight, is to discuss pending Starwood legislation with Starwood representatives and consider possible terms of a memorandum of understanding with Starwood. Our last meeting, we discussed some things that we would like to have in the memorandum of agreement, and our council sent those over to Starwood representatives, and they responded back with I'm going to call it the red line version of a memorandum of agreement. And I'm sure that our members have had enough time to look at that and have some concerns. I've been meeting all afternoon, it seems, from 4:30. I actually had a meeting this morning at 8:30 at Beaverbrook, and then 4:30 and 5:30, so I'm a little confused as to the meetings. But we met today with representatives from Starwood who are in the audience, and I will introduce them in a second. Just tried to iron out a few details and see if they would budge a little bit. And they did change a few things, which I can go over with the board. I did ask the members of our board, and just to get it clear, myself, as a representative of the board, Dory and Rick met, and town council met with them, and before we met, I had asked the members of the board to present to me some of the concerns that they had in the proposed red line memorandum of agreement, and you all did respond, so thank you. And I brought all those concerns up at the meeting. As far as changes that we came through tonight, about an hour ago, and I would invite Robin Daniels and Matthew Berry to, chime in if you want. Just come up to the microphone, introduce yourself. Same thing with town council and Rick. Some of the things that we changed, or that Starwood has agreed to change, and was just a better clarification on the host community fees. I know when I read it, I wrote a note that said it only addresses the full build-out of commercial and not residential. That is still in there, so we will still receive fees for residential units up to $28.55, I believe. So we will still receive those fees as part of the host community fees. So that is not taken out. The other thing, too, is, and I believe Starwood agreed to this, is that they're going to guarantee, let me see, as a result, less than 45. They're going to make a guarantee. The difference between 485 and, it's a little confusing, but they're capped at 485, and they will pay up to 485 if commercial development stops. But there was an option in there that the master developer, at its sole discretion, could make a payment to Abington equal to the difference, or they could convey a parcel of land. And we asked them that would rather just have the money. We don't need an acre of land up there, and it could be possibly landlocked, and it would be something that would be coming off the tax rolls, and they graciously agreed to that. I believe the other question we had was for legal fees. We had put down attorney's fees. They crossed that out, but back and forth, they will pay attorney's fees if we agree to this memorandum of agreement. I believe those are the only major things that changed in the agreement. But if town council Greg Corbo could maybe interject, were there any other changes you think that we agreed to a little while ago?
If before that happens, if I could just point out one of the key issues that I know we all had concern with was, what is the status of the agreement, the host community agreement that's in place today that was revised in 2010, and that was, at least in our opinion, very vague. And the representatives from Starwood have agreed that they would be more than willing to make sure that it's quite clear in the agreement and commemorated that the provisions of that agreement as it exists today will be and remain in full effect. I think that was a concern about some of the language as it's written in the litigation, in the legislation, how the legislation may affect existing agreements, and they've made it clear that they're willing to abide by the existing host community agreement. So, I mean, I don't know if there's questions specifically, but that was, in my mind, one of the big issues that was rather cloudy in the existing agreement, but.
So how
You wanna
does
speak
that
to that,
jive with what's now?
That's your job, sir.
Okay, so what's currently being proposed as a result of our negotiations since we last met are essentially that Starwood is going to honor the 2010 agreement, which means that the town gets certain payments based on commercial and residential development up to a maximum dollar figure. And under that 2010 agreement, it would have been $1.975 million less payments that have already been made. And we believe that puts us at about $1.5 million. So again, we're not guaranteed to get that, but that's the cap that we can get if there's full build-out of commercial and residential space, okay? If there's not full build-out, and there's less than full build-out of residential space, we get nothing above and beyond what's actually built. If there's not full build-out of commercial space, we're entitled to the difference between $485,100 and what's actually built for a maximum of $152,075. Okay, so that's if there's not full build-out. Yes?
Where did the 485,100 come from?
So that's the number, that's the full commercial build-out number, okay? So if there's full commercial build-out, we would get 485,100. If there's not, we'd obviously get something less than that. And under this agreement, if there's not full build-out, we can be guaranteed a maximum of $152,075. Okay, so that's element one, which basically preserves the existing agreement and actually gives a little bit more in that you're entitled to a certain amount for commercial development, whether it's built or not. And under the existing agreement, you don't have that. Okay? The second element is that there's a mitigation of impacts provision that would be paid in addition to any host community fees that are paid. And under that provision, there'll be a one-time payment of $100,000, and then an opportunity for an additional $400,000 in payments based on residential development that occurs within the Abington portion of the project. And again, that $400,000 is not guaranteed and is based only on residential development within the Abington portion of the project. What is guaranteed is $100,000. And a third element of this is that they're willing to pay the town's legal fees and expenses incurred in connection with negotiating this agreement and navigating the amendment to the special legislation. There's a provision for a payment in lieu of taxes or the opportunity to negotiate a payment of lieu in taxes if non-taxable development occurs within the Abington portion of the property. And under the special legislation itself, Abington has the opportunity to collect real estate taxes for any property within the Abington portion of the project.
Andy?
On the legal fees, that's capped at 25,000 still?
Yes.
Do you know what the fees are today?
I don't, but I don't think
Do you know?
it's,
Is it close to that number?
I don't think so. Yes.
Some of this information that you're giving us right now, what does the pending legislation, I don't know if we've gone into this, some of this almost like redundant, isn't some of it going to be guaranteed in the legislation that's before the thing right now? I mean, I would like to know what the differences are between what is this legislation going to do to the town, or our end of the town, and what is currently being offered? Is it, you know?
Under the currently existing legislation, the responsibility for sort of operation and maintenance of the, this area rests with the master developer and the Southfield governing body. So the town of Abington has no responsibility for, police, fire, Department of Public Works, maintenance of roads, et cetera. And on the flip side of that, you're not entitled to collect any taxes. So under the amended agreement, that changes. And under the amended agreement, the town of Abington has the opportunity to assess and collect taxes on all the land that's located within the Abington portion of the project. And it is likewise responsible for providing governmental services to that portion of the project: police, fire, DPW, road maintenance, et cetera. What's not dealt with in the legislation is whether Abington should be entitled to some mitigation of impacts that occur above and beyond what it can recover in tax revenue. And those impacts include, the obligation to provide mutual aid and the loss of those services to the town while that aid is being provided. An increase in traffic impacts, and other impacts that might be associated with the development of this property that are above and beyond what you may be able to collect in tax revenue are dealt with through this agreement.
Just
Yes.
a follow-up to that. Even if the land isn't developed, they own the land. Don't they still pay taxes on the land even though it's not developed? I mean, right now, under this agreement, they own the portion of land in Weymouth, a portion of land in Rockland, and a portion of, and I understand, I think what I'm trying to get my arms wrapped around is we're saying we'll get taxes and provide services if we build property on there. I understand that, but I'm thinking that they would have to pay taxes on the property anyways.
Well, that's right. So you're entitled to start collecting taxes starting in the next fiscal year, whether property is developed in Abington or not. How that property is classified, I can't say at this point. But you will, begin receiving tax revenue for fiscal year 16.
If the legislation passes.
If the legislation passes, okay? Whereas right now, you collect no tax
That's
revenue.
correct. Okay, that's fine. That answers the question.
Okay.
Some of the other differences, we received this a while ago, and it may be one-sided, but it compared the existing legislation to the proposed legislation, and you folks can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm just going to do the highlighted things. It goes from a 5-member board to a 9-member board. That's one of the big changes. It goes from 15 alcohol licenses on the entire, development to being distributed to, is it 9 and 2, 13 and 2 or something, 13 to Weymouth and 2 to Rockland. Another big thing too is previously, all 3 communities, I think through their town meeting or the city council, had to agree to changes in governing documents and agree on zoning changes. But now, each community must agree to their own zoning changes. So now we're in charge of the zoning for Abington alone, and it doesn't require the other towns' votes. Before, towns were not obligated to provide services, and now the towns are required to provide services for their own portion. And that's just some of the changes between the existing and the proposed legislation. Annie? I'm sorry.
Could you just
Go ahead,
repeat the liquor license thing again? I thought it...
Originally,
Rockland gets some, Weymouth gets some.
right.
We do not.
that was, in the legislation, I believe it's 13 to Weymouth and 2 to Rockland, or something to that effect.
Is that true?
I think Rockland does get 2, I'm not sure how many you can, yeah, go ahead, Matt, thanks. Just introduce.
Good evening, Matthew Barry with Starwood. Thank you for having me here tonight. I'm here, Robin Daniels is with me as well, so when I don't know the answer to things, Robin will approach the podium as well. The legislation filed on, that was dated May 30th, that was filed in June, was 13, I think the division you've shown was included. The requests have been made by Rockland to change that. Those have been forwarded on through their delegation, and I believe there were some requests made by Abington, and those have been forwarded on as well. So I do not know the current status, but I believe the change, the distribution of liquor licenses has been amended.
Okay, all right, thank you. Andy?
That, I don't know, a couple of things. What is, right now, Southfield, Tri-Town has zoned that property, correct? All those parcels are zoned in a certain way, is that the?
There is zoning right now for,
I don't know if you know this, or if Rick would know this. When Abington, if this legislation goes through, what zoning is going to apply on the parcel that Abington has control over, or can tax? Do you know?
I think it's primarily, it's not zoned commercial currently. I think there's, most of it would be open space right now. I don't think there's a significant piece that's zoned otherwise, but
yeah, I believe it's 100% open space.
100%? Okay.
Is it currently zoned through Southfield?
The land in Southfield that is in Abington,
Is currently zoned?
I believe is, for all intents and purposes, considered 100% open space.
As part of your master plan, do you plan on seeking to change that zoning?
That is a possibility. That is what we're here to talk about. I mean, we're anxious to partner with all three towns, and certainly we welcome the opportunity to speak with Abington directly, such that as a higher and better use could be found for that land, that we may petition through your normal zoning practices, the ability to increase that use, and that would be at your sole discretion as to whether or not that use change from open space to some other use was beneficial to your town.
Well, aren't you going to have a master plan for the whole development? Isn't that going to be?
We will. I mean, we already do. There is a
I know
master
there is
plan
one
now.
But that one's not going to be the one that you follow, I presume, right?
No, we're following the entitlements as they exist, and we will, a major part of the legislation that was clarified by your chairman is the ability for each of the towns to control their own zoning.
I understand that.
I've been a
That's
developer.
That's somewhat of a concern to me, too, not to interrupt, only because we have no way to get up there. We have to go through Abington, through Rockland or through Weymouth. If all of a sudden there's 300 or 400 homes built up there that are located in Abington, it's going to be very difficult for us to get up there and service those for fire, police protection, for buses, for schools, that sort of thing. So that is a concern to me as to what your master plan envisions for that property in the future. Right now, we know what it is, because in the legislation it says it remains open space and it's part of a golf course. But it could be anything.
But that would be at the sole discretion of Abington. And so, right now, it is open space. Right now, the legislation confirms that. And so that your zoning map will take on this land. You may have a hole in your zoning map now, or something called Southfield. It will be brought back to Abington as open space. And if we, in the future, come and petition Abington to change it, at your sole discretion, you can approve or disapprove that. And we would not landlock homes. We would certainly find a way to ensure that the roadway infrastructure and the transportation would be beneficial to those homeowners. And there could be solutions that we do not yet envision for homes or commercial development on that land. But the way that the legislation is written, we have to come back to Abington.
I understand that also. It's just, I don't know, it would be nice if we knew what your master plan was at this, because again, we know what the plan is now, and it's changing, and so we're kind of...
No, our master plan right now is open space. It is open space because that is what it is today.
But that's my point.
This is a 10 to 15 year...
Is the master plan going to change? And I think probably it is, or...
We don't know. I mean, right now, we don't have plans. I don't have something in my back pocket or in my mind that changes the use of Abington until we have such time as to meet and spend more time with your planning departments, with your in-house departments, with the board directly to talk about what are the benefits, what are the concerns, what is possible, and if it's the will of Abington for it to be always open space, we won't pursue opportunities to change the master plan. So it really is more of a relationship and a dialogue that we've not yet had the opportunity to have. So today, and for the foreseeable future, it's open space. But we'd like to have that dialogue with you and the right to do that.
Yeah, I think that the follow-up on Andy's question, I guess I had it too, is I'm not sure if he's referring to the Abington portion only, but my understanding is under the existing master development plan, there's so much space allocated for commercial, there's so much for residential. I think his point, and I guess mine would be, from everything I've read, you know, the commercial market is fell apart. So I guess the question is, how much of that do you anticipate will be going to more residential development, not just in Abington, but in Rockland and Weymouth? Because, again, you know, the question is mutual aid, you know, that sort of thing, and, you know, I think that's kind of the question that I had, too.
Sure. I mean, we have a plan for commercial, and the legislation really shares our plan. And I wish I'd brought some of our boards to share that in more detail with you. We have looked at this site. It's 19 miles from Boston. It has a commuter rail station. It has all of the zoning and entitlement components to have a successful mixed-use community. The challenge is, how do you get there? And so I'm a commercial developer. I've been doing this for years and years, longer than I want to admit, maybe 2 decades. So we have looked at this site and looked at how do we get to commercial. The legislation says 2,855 homes. That should ring true to everyone. That's always been the number, and that is the number today. And so there is no necessarily more residential. It is residential. And we think the path to successful commercial is to differentiate ourselves in the market, to look at the market and understand the market and follow where it is going. And so today, we have an incomplete parkway and an uncertain future. And we think by finishing the infrastructure and building a vibrant village center and building the rec complex so that we have the full transportation infrastructure completed, the improvements to the MBTA station, the improvements to Route 18 off of exit 16 all the way across the parkway, all the way out the east side improvements back out to exit 14, we convert this land from landlocked, non-competitive, challenging to get to land to some of the most competitive commercial space on the South Shore. Now, the South Shore isn't some of the other areas in municipal Boston that are thriving, all right? This isn't Cambridge, so we have to understand what drives bringing those businesses here. We spent a lot of time with the South Shore Chamber of Commerce. We spent a lot of time educating ourselves and finding the right commercial partners, the right commercial businesses, and finding a way to create a site that is attractive to businesses. We need big businesses. We don't need little spaces. We have committed to a commercial minimum of 900,000 square feet. 900,000 square feet, if we're successful, makes us one of the largest commercial developers in the Commonwealth. And we believe we can do that. So we're showing a path toward commercial development. We're not changing the ratios. We're not changing how everything's laid out. We do think it's in the town's best interest, all of the towns, to look at the highest and best use of their land. I'm a developer, so there's always a combination of open space and developed space. This is meant to be a more dense product, and we still believe in that. We think it makes a lot of sense to bring people in. People enjoy that kind of feeling, and the new business commercial market looks for amenities. The amenities will be built here. Those are committed in the legislation. The recreation, the village center concept, the transportation improvements, that's how we get to commercial, and we're seeking not only the 900,000 square foot minimum, the full 2 million entitlement. That's where we make the maximum amount of money as a developer.
Okay. Maureen?
You happen to mention, I have 2 questions. One, you happen to mention the Parkway, and in the legislation, the Parkway financing. is, can you speak to that for those who may not have had the opportunity to read it?
The parkway financing is a contingent element. The legislature is only so powerful. And so they can do certain things, but they cannot amend agreements. And so post-legislation, with the help of the administration, the governor's office, we believe that the legislation guides us to a restructuring of the existing parkway debt. The existing parkway debt adds $6 to the millage rate, $6.50 to the mill rate on the commercial. That is a burden to the commercial development. We don't have a lot of commercial developers interested in paying an extra $6.50. And so we believe the administration understands that, and we'll find a mechanism to give us the opportunity to attract commercial development. The second half of the parkway is equally important. More important, to change for commercial development, this has to be a transportation simplified access point. Now, the Navy did a great job. This isn't easy to get to. It's not easy for your residents to get here and enjoy all of this space that was available to them, and it's not easy to cut across. And the parkway is that solution. And so in lieu of, I have a great aerial photograph I wish I had in front of me, but there's an aerial photograph that describes this as clear as can be. You have a site with very challenged access points, Route 18 or Route 3, and we're 5 to 10 minutes off of either of those major arterials. Or you put a parkway in. And once that parkway and the associated improvements surrounding it are completed, this is one of the most desirable locations on the South Shore, because no matter where you live and your workforce lives, they can get here. If you want to come from the north, you get off before the Route 3 narrows. If you want to come from the south, you get off before the traffic really builds. If you want to come from Brockton, swing up 18 and come right in. If you want to come from Situate or Mashpee, and you come right down onto the parkway. So the parkway is something that we cannot overstate the importance. We believe the administration understands the importance of it, and it is the critical component for successful commercial. Without the parkway, likely we could build the residential. People will drive a distance to be home in a place that they like. Businesses will not. They want easy access for their employees and easy access if they're a retailer, and the parkway is the key, and we believe that financing will occur.
Second question, Maureen?
Second question had to do with water and sewer.
Yes.
There's a lot of talk, amongst people in the different communities. Can you speak to your plan for that, for providing water for this development that you're talking about, and also wastewater? What's covered in the legislation on that?
Well, the legislature is clear and simple. The obligation for water and wastewater is transferred from South Shore Tri-Town Development Corporation to us. And so we will be the responsible entity for executing permanent water and permanent wastewater. There are multiple water solutions. Most of them start with the MWRA. They have, I don't want to say unlimited, but substantial water supplies, and they would like to get to this site. How exactly it is routed to the site, we're still working with the MWRA, but they have expressed that they are interested in making that happen, and there's a number of mechanisms for which that can happen. Your MOA has a right of first offer, and so if the Abington-Rockland Joint Waterworks has water, that solution is acceptable to us. It's land in Abington. We're happy to accept that. Our premise is normalizing. This should be normal. We want to be residents and citizens of Abington, Rockland, and Weymouth. We don't want to be citizens of some other entity. We want normal governmental oversight. And so the wastewater treatment plant is the concept for handling the wastewater. And so there is a MEPA permit that exists and has cited the wastewater treatment plant, and we will be responsible for making that happen in the right capacities to serve the full build-out of the project. And we've agreed to that in the legislation.
Thank you.
I just follow up on, there's a MEPA permit that exists for wastewater with a site, where is this?
Yes.
Do you know where the site is?
We do.
Could you let us know where it is?
Sure. It's just south of the Parkway. It's sited in Abington.
It's in there. It's- And that would handle all the wastewater in the,
Yes, the Southfield will become its own sewer district.
Just to follow up on the water map, when you make your proposal, or give us an opportunity to make a proposal, you're making that to the joint Abington, Rockland Waterworks as opposed to the Abington portion and the Rockland portion of that commission?
Well, in the way contractual language, I will consult with my attorneys. I believe because we will hopefully have two agreements, not just one. We will have an agreement, and to honor our agreement with Abington, we will make a request for the land in Abington, and to honor our agreement with Rockland, we will make a request for the land in Rockland. We will likely make two separate requests to the Abington-Rockland Joint Waterworks.
But I attended the meeting last night, and my understanding of the process is that your proposal, your application is made to the joint board, 3 members from Rockland, 3 members from Abington, and they vote on that. And I believe the reason for that is so, you know, one side of the board doesn't unfairly grant water permitting rights, you know, to their section, and the other, you know, section of the board doesn't grant unfair water permitting rights, you know, to the Abington side. But is there anything in the legislation that would bypass that mechanism now and have you go directly to the Rockland side without Abington's, you know, input on that?
No, not at all.
Okay.
All of your jurisdictional authority and authority of the Abington-Rockland Joint Waterworks is unchanged, unmodified. We want your normal, customary process, and we will abide by that.
All right. Okay, thank you.
I think our concerns are addressed in the memorandum of agreement too, the proposed one, the red line one. I think that everything that we had asked for about the joint waterworks language is in there.
Well, again, my only question was, there was a side comment that there might be, and again, as the legislation goes through, there's amendments made to it. But there was a comment that unless there was, just like the 40B, my understanding of 40B is that basically has been written into the legislation, there'll be no 40B development over in Southfield. It's been
No.
specifically written into it.
No, the existing enabling legislation has a requirement for effectively 20% of affordable and workforce, and that is now being cut in half to 10%, which is the standard for the Commonwealth. 10% is what most municipalities abide by, and we're abiding by that as well.
Would the 10% apply to the whole project, or just 10% Weymouth, or?
10%, the whole project. And it's been written that it does not affect the town's 40B calculations. This is a standalone development with its own 10%, and it does not affect in any way the towns.
Mike,
Through you, Mr. Chair, may I ask a question of Mr. Dion?
Sure.
You alluded to being at a meeting yesterday. Is it your understanding that Rockland believes that they can provide water to the Rockland section independently of the joint waterworks?
No, and the meeting I was at 6 PM was a joint meeting of the Abington-Rockland Joint Waterworks, and the way it works is you've got 3 commissioners from Rockland, and they address their distribution issues. Then Abington does its distribution issues, and then they jointly meet on finances and water supply issues. But there was nothing said that Rockland would be basically bypassing that, other than there was a comment made that in this legislation, there might have been an amendment or some language in there that would basically bypass going to the joint commissioners, that they have 6 votes to vote on who, you know, what type of supply that each town gets.
Okay.
And again, the point was made that it's been reported that Abington may be getting another 500,000 gallons of sewer capacity, which would enable some additional development in this town. And again, my concern would be, I wouldn't want to see that skewed, that, you know, Rockland was doing their own thing, and I'm sure Rockland wouldn't want to see Abington doing their own thing. It needs to be joint.
So under the agreement that I reviewed that was proposed to Rockland, that their language says that within 6 months of the effective date, master developer agrees to submit to Rockland a request for Rockland to submit a proposal for the provision by Rockland of potable water sufficient in the master developer's reasonable estimate to serve the Rockland portion of the project. Now, it's my understanding that the way it works is that there's a joint waterworks and that Rockland can't independently provide water outside of the mechanism for the joint waterworks. If that's not so, if Rockland has the ability to provide water outside of that arrangement, the way this is written, it would allow them to do that.
It's a good point, because the night that they had the meeting in Rockland and in reviewing that MOA, I was very surprised that it seemed like the Board of Selectmen was receiving that application and voting on it, as opposed to, I think the Abington MOA was the Abington-Rockland Joint Waterworks. Because, and again, I think the Water Commissioner was very clear. He put out an email about 2 weeks ago, but last night, that any application for, other than, maybe ones or two houses, but any sort of development, need to go through the full board. And the other thing he stated was, right now, we don't have any water. And two, although it hasn't been official, they applied to the DEP, and at least verbally, they've got feedback that they're not going to approve their request for additional, pumping of water from our supply. So that would negate any sort of opportunity on either side to, anything of substance for water until that gets resolved. And the other thing he stated was that basically the cost, I think there was some ideas of developing new water sources, I think off of, in Abington and Myers Ave, and I think perhaps over in Rockland, but I think the feeling was it was prohibitively expensive to do that, so.
Okay. Mike?
Well, I mean, if it benefits the town, I mean, we are going to be bringing in a water supply, and we are building a wastewater treatment plant. And so we'd be happy to open a meeting with the Abington-Rockland Joint Waterworks and talking about additional capacity that the town might want for future use, or additional capacity in the wastewater treatment plant. I mean, this is certainly a development that is meant to bring this back from being a separate, and stitching it back into the town. And so if the town can benefit by additional capacity, we're building. And building's what we do for a business. So we're happy to address those issues as we move forward.
Matt, you did an outstanding job telling what the value of this property was with the train and the remote and the expressway and stuff like that, and it kind of leads me to believe we should have got more from the mitigation. That's okay. I gotta express my views, Robin and Matt. I'm a little bit taken back in the shortness of this, and I think I should be, because at one point I had talked to a member of the board on a surrounding town that said we got to stick together at this, and only to find out that they had been negotiating. This town didn't know that was going on, and quite frankly, I look at this here. It's a Rockland document more than it is an Abington document. That's my feelings, that there's more in here. I don't know, like Mr. Dion said, about what my fear is, and I would hope that you could reverse your position and put yourself in my shoes. You have done an outstanding job. This is very impressive. If I was your boss, I'd give you a raise. But
This is being recorded, right?
that's okay. But I have to do what I think is right for my town.
We-
And I think that some of the things in here, I'm not opposed to legislation, okay? I want to be upfront about that. But some of the things in here, I don't want to harness my town later on with the responsibility, as Mr. Dion spoke of some of the zoning changes that's mentioned in here. I don't know why it has to be mentioned, because I think in order for us to make zoning changes, in my opinion, we should have our police and fire personnel here and get their opinion on what is an adequate way to get in there, if in fact we even want to do that. This is a lot for me right now, and then again, I don't want to come back. You guys have done a good job, and I truly appreciate you being here. But there's a lot of things on here, and this is the first meeting I had. I was on vacation on the other one. There's a lot of stuff on here that I just don't see why it has to be in here, and I'm afraid by agreeing to this right now, that we're going to harness the town later on, because there's a lot of words in here. What's favorably market conditions, conditionally obligated master developer and different things like this, and even to the point where, you know, we talked about the golf course, and in the original enabling legislation back years ago, if that golf course wasn't developed, if, Mr. Shea is the authority on this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it was somewhere to the point, if it didn't say, it was $1 million that was supposed to go to Tri-Town. And, you know, sometimes, I understand the market conditions, everything has changed, but some of those things would, you know what, there is no golf course, but is it really going to be open space, or what's going to be there? And it required the pavement being taken up and different things. And all that seems to be going out the window. So I have a genuine concern myself personally, not trying to speak for my board. What would happen, I guess, to the attorney if we didn't? You know, here's the deal. This is all about good faith. We want to be a good neighbor. We, and I'm sure, not speaking for my colleagues, want this to be successful. But from my standpoint right here, this is not a good document for the town right now, and I have to vote on this tonight? Or am I going to lose? I don't think that's fair.
Well, and I don't think that's what we're asking for.
I'm sorry, Matt, what?
That's not what we're asking for. I have shared with your chairman, and I'll share with you here publicly.
Okay, fine.
We're here for a 10-year to 15-year relationship.
That's perfect.
We're not under a time constraint.
Okay.
We are in working on legislation. That legislation is progressing. There are deadlines to the legislation itself. We would like your support. If that doesn't happen, or you feel that this is too short a period of time by which you can think through this process and review this document, that's not going to affect how I feel on Friday. I'll come back Monday night. I'll come back
That's fine.
Tuesday night.
Thank you. I apologize. My mistake.
I don't want anyone to feel pressure that this is inordinate pressure. We believe fully in good relationships with the towns in which we develop. Okay. We've been working very hard to create that with all three towns, and we do not want you to feel pressure from us tonight to do that. We will come right back tomorrow morning, Monday, whenever you invite me, and...
If you get a raise, will you buy us breakfast?
So, yeah, absolutely. I do not want you to feel that pressure. I do not want you to feel that comes from us. We would like you to take the time you feel necessary to do the right thing for this town so that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, you don't think, had we only had an extra 2 months, this would have been a much better development. That's not the relationship we want to build.
Okay, so in other words, we can make changes with you in regards to this. A lot of this, I believe the Rockland Board of Selectmen agreed to last night. And we could make our own changes and potentially, hopefully be better. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. We started with the Rockland agreement in the interest of time.
Thank you.
And to offer really essentially the exact same thing. And so we'd be happy to spend more time with you and talk through it. I don't want to speak on behalf of your delegates in the legislature, but we want to build a relationship, and we don't want that relationship to feel pressured or false. We want it to be true and to last 10, 15 or more years.
And just one more thing, Matt. If we don't go for this tonight and we don't accept it, I don't want that to have a negative impact on the legislature to say, oh, you know, you're acting like a renegade. You're not, you know what I mean? You're not. I think I expressed my concerns. I know something has to be done, and this document right here is probably my biggest concern over the thing. So, fine, thank you.
Thank you.
I think the options tonight are the same as we discussed before. I mean, I think there's 3 options now. We can vote to support the legislation, you know, with our memorandum of agreement. We can not take a vote and don't do anything and let it pass. I think we may be at risk of losing some, maybe I'm speaking out of school here, but we might be losing some of the benefits of the mitigation. And the third one is to vote no. We don't support the legislation. We could not come to a memorandum of agreement. I look at those 3 basic options, and maybe I'm wrong. Greg, do you have any opinion on that, or?
Well, based on what I'm hearing, it sounds to me like you can take a vote tonight that says that we're going to reach out to your legislative delegation and say that we cannot support the legislation at this time, that we ask that no action be taken until such time as we're able to work out an appropriate mitigation agreement, and that would be acceptable to Starwood, and that they would be willing to continue to sit down with us and negotiate that agreement, and then bring this back to the legislature at the appropriate time.
Or, just as a little wrinkle to that, just a tiny little change, if you believe that this legislation is good, and you believe that what you have heard, wherever we have spoken, what I've said tonight, and what we will continue to say, we would like the legislation to pass, because we believe that is the path to a successful Southfield. I will tell you tonight, we'll honor what we've offered Friday, Sunday, 2 weeks from now, 10 weeks from now. For us to develop successfully in these three towns, we have to have relationships with these three towns. And so you could do that, or you could say to your delegates, this is a future. We would like to support this future, and we believe, because you're the town, I'm just a developer. If I don't come back in good faith, and I don't come to an agreement with you, I will not be able to develop in your town, and that would be a shame. And we've shown it. The other two towns have agreements. We're building those relationships. We want to do the same here. We will, whether it's today, tomorrow, or after the legislation passes.
Maureen?
I was under the impression that this memorandum of agreement would have to be in place prior to the legislation going through, which is scheduled for hopefully the end of this legislation session, which is Thursday.
Thursday.
So am I wrong? Can we support the legislation change and complete a memorandum of agreement after the fact? Or
I believe you can.
Is there no binding agreement, nothing for you to consider? Could you theoretically say, the legislation's done, we don't care about this if you don't do it by Thursday?
If I might, I think your concern is exactly what I think ought to be the right concern. And with all due respect to Mr. Barry, who I agree is, has certainly gone beyond the call in the last couple of weeks to try and deal with this issue and deal with town officials. Relationships take time, and until there's time, I think the best opportunity for this board to get the best conditions possible in a memorandum of agreement is while our legislators are waiting for us to call them tonight and find out how this meeting went and whether or not our selectmen are going to be in favor of legislation under whatever conditions have been negotiated. I think, and that's not an insult. I know. I think you can probably appreciate that. That's the leverage, if that exists, that this community has, is before legislation is passed. Simple as that.
Just a slightly different point of view.
A little differently.
Well, you're the town. So you have all the rights and authority of a town. And after the legislation is passed, you have the zoning control of all the land we own in Abington. And so while I understand that it feels like your leverage changes after a successful passing of the legislation, it certainly changes if it fails. But if it passes, your leverage grows. You are now fully 12% of the land we own. We come to you directly and exclusively. And I have to be honest with you, I've done work all over the country, born and raised here, but lots of other places. I've never had a town think control of zoning gave me leverage over the town. The town has substantive leverage over us if this legislation passes, and we hope for your approval. We hope for you to recommend passage.
But I think what Rick was talking about, the leverage that we have at this point, is the fact that we object to the legislation passing. If the legislation doesn't pass, then you guys are not where you want to be. So if there was some way, and I'm not saying this is going to happen or should happen, but if there was some way for us to object loudly enough to stop the legislation from passing, that's our leverage right now. Of course, we're going to have a leverage with the zoning somewhere down the road, but again, we're only 10 or 12% of the entire development, and initially it was going to be a golf course, and now it's going to be open space, so I don't think you guys are going to be concentrating, initially at least, on the Abington portion. I think our leverage lies in the fact that if we can speak loudly enough to stop the legislation, then that's to your detriment and to our advantage, and that's our leverage at this point.
Well, I think it's a mutual detriment.
Yes, and again...
I mean, I do believe it is leverage for you, for sure. And we are here really on the eve right? If
Well,
if we,
that's next to it, and I asked you earlier, but maybe you could let people know, the rest of the board know where the legislation stands at this point in time, just so we.
It's my understanding the legislation's in third reading, which means it's ready for a vote. So one house votes, the other house votes, and then it goes to the governor's desk. And the deadline for that to happen is Thursday at midnight. Thursday of this week, July 31st, at midnight.
It's my understanding, too, that one of the sponsors, the main sponsor of the bill, is looking for our vote. You know, he's going to hold it until the last possible minute. But, okay.
Yeah, correct. And I just want to make sure the board is clear, Andy, you did clarify to some extent, but in response to Maureen's concern, I don't think the town is not in a better position, and it's hard to believe we're going to get a better proposal to act upon after Thursday. That's just the way it works. And so maybe that's not the case, but I think all signs point to the fact that after this legislation is passed, if it's passed, that the town is not going to be in a better position to reach an agreement.
Agreement.
And that's why I asked the question.
Yeah.
And if I could, Mr. Chair, it seems that the question before you tonight is you're being asked to support the legislation before Thursday. And in exchange for giving that support, you're being offered an agreement that is being pledged to you as mitigating the impacts that legislation is going to have on your community. And perhaps it would be helpful to the board in making that decision if the proponents of this agreement can explain to you how what's being proposed here addresses your concerns and mitigates any costs that Abington will incur as a result of this agreement.
Well, we have shared with you revenue projections. There's a lot of ways to look at benefit. Right now, you have an existing development on your borders that's not creating any economic stimulus and has sat without development for 20 years. I've heard the last plane to take off was 20 years ago. And so over that 20-year period of time, there's been no tax revenue, zero tax revenue to the town of Abington, and there's been host community payments made on behalf of the developer. That is a private agreement between the town of Abington and the master developer. A different master developer will not have to honor that agreement. Once one leaves, that whole negotiation would begin again. And so the benefit of the particular legislation that we're offering, as shown in the revenue projections, exclusively for the land in Abington, is direct tax revenue and continued host community payments that in the first year are approximately $200,000, plus a mitigation payment that's been offered in the first year of $100,000, so $300,000 year one, compared to zero, I think, last year, and over the period of development, $3 million worth of host community payments and tax revenue. And so beyond that, you have the opportunity to find a higher and better use for the land at your sole discretion. And if that does not work for you, you have $3 million. If that is not enough, there has been many studies, which I did not bring here tonight, that show if a development creates $1.5 billion of assessed value, that development benefits the surrounding communities in the entire South Shore in a way that churns that money 2 to 3 times. And so Abington, not only in direct jobs for people who live in Abington, but for the businesses in Abington, as well as for the homes that are built. One of the things, when I bought my very first house, I renovated it myself, and then I bought a brand-new house because I didn't want to renovate it again. What they did not tell me is they only really finish about 90% of the house. They don't paint all your walls, they paint them white, and they don't paint them the colors people, my wife, not me. There's no, the changes of the light fixtures because you get builder grade, or maybe you don't get the light fixture you want a new light fixture, flooring, as well as window treatments. Those are all small businesses. Some people do it themselves. I would do it myself. Small businesses that surround Southfield in Abington will benefit tremendously from that last 10%. 10% 10% of $1.3 billion is a tremendous amount of work that we're not generating. The homeowners are going to generate because they buy a house that needs to be finished. And so what we're offering is, in lieu of another 10 years of looking at Southfield and waiting for Southfield to happen and $0 of revenue, we're offering to make it happen. We've identified the problems, and we didn't even need to do a lot of work. We just sat with people in the towns and said, what are the problems? Well, the problems are the taxes are too high, the water rate's too high, there's no water, there's no sewer, and there's no parkway. There was no miracle. We were told what the problems were. We produced solutions. We are confident that we will, over the next 10 years, build this whole development out. And the benefit to Abington cannot be just shown by that $3 million of direct revenue. It is 2 to 3 times that in jobs, in businesses, in reputation. The South Shore could use an economic stimulus, a commercial center that this could provide. We're ready to provide it. I wish we had known we were going to have this type of conversation. I would have brought the South Shore Chamber of Commerce and let them stand here and tell you how important this is for businesses on the South Shore, how important this is to change the South Shore from a bedroom community to more and more core businesses, large businesses whose employees live here, and they drive to Boston, or they drive to Dedham, or they drive somewhere else. There's no reason to do that. Build a building here, we'll build it for you, and all of your employees can drive half as long and gain the rest of those hours of their life back again, back to raising their kids and coaching soccer and all the other things that could come of it, because you don't have to drive an hour and a half to get downtown. You don't have to be away as much as you're away. And it's a huge incentive to pursue. It's also what has always been the vision of Southfield. The most recent vision, 10 years of not doing it. We're offering 10 years of executing it.
Tom?
Matt, I just have a question, and then I'll respond to your comments. But you mentioned the wastewater treatment plant. I talked to you a while back, you might not remember, but I think you said at the time you thought that might be between $8 and $12 million to site that, to build it and site it.
I mean, we have seen proposals that range anywhere from, $30 to $58 million for the wastewater treatment
Okay.
plant.
That's a lot more than I had thought. But my question is, would that be considered, if it's going to be sited in Abington, question one is, would that be considered part of commercial development, and would we be entitled to host communities on that build-out?
I don't know if that's considered commercial. I don't know if it's a municipal, you will get tax revenue in your normal process of taxing something that's developed, but I don't believe that's considered commercial in our definition of commercial in the zoning and ordinances.
The other question is, where you say MEPA there's a permit in the legislation, whatever,
There's a MEPA permit, the legislation does not alter it, it's still a permit.
does that bypass any zoning that Abington could affect?
No.
Okay, so we still have to come to Abington to,
It's already zoned for it, though.
Yeah, it's cited in Abington, we'd have to come to Abington for a
zoned,
building
right.
permit.
But if you come for a building permit?
Building
but
permit.
it's not zoned, I mean, that's one of the uses for,
It's zoned currently for the sewage treatment plant.
Okay.
You would be coming back
For the building.
but not for a zoning change. Yeah.
and the only other, I guess, comment would be, I just find this, a lot of good work, and I followed you and Robin, and I don't know who your predecessor was, not predecessor, but your colleague from Florida when you came to us in October, and I think you're very professional. But I just find this proposal insufficient. To me, when I look at it, it's more geared to, Weymouth's got 48%, Rockland's got 42%, they're gonna get a bigger chunk of the pie, Abington's got 12%, it's not gonna affect them. But again, for me, and when I look at what our department managers and heads are saying, is it is gonna affect Abington. It's gonna be a community over there, at least 6,000 to 7,000 people. It is gonna affect us, and it's gonna affect our quality of life, and for in effect, $100,000 guaranteed payment just doesn't seem to be sufficient, to me, as a board member representing the, the people of Abington. I think your vision is very good, and you seem to be an honorable man. I made notes that you're committed to the $900,000 a square foot commercial, which is beneficial to everybody. But building residential over there, anything I've ever read, it has a negative effect on the town. Any money you collect in taxes, you're providing more in services. So that's why I think when we first went through this, there was a balance between commercial and residential. Because commercial is good, for a town. And it's good for the community, it's good for jobs, all that stuff. But for me, I just find it insufficient in my eyes, but, it's
I
just my
appreciate that.
opinion.
I mean, I want you to know that the ratios of residential and commercial are maintained. Right now, there are no residential units in Abington. And so what Abington will benefit from is the home values in Southfield range from 30 to 50% higher than the surrounding communities. And so, those people, adding people into a town generates business. And so I'm a developer, so I'll just disclose that now. I'm a big believer that development of the right kind, and this is the right kind, benefits the surrounding community. Those people will be using services, they'll be visiting your restaurants, they'll be creating opportunities, and they'll be hiring people to help them finish their homes. And then 900,000 square feet of commercial is a significant driver of benefit to the residents of your town who hopefully will work there. And then you have the opportunity to change the 0 and 100% open space at your sole discretion. So I hope you're not looking at 100,000. You should be looking at $3.1 million times 2 or 3 of the economic churn of that investment.
Well, unfortunately, I don't really have a good picture of the host community fees, because it seems to me it was higher when we started back in 2010, and to try to decipher it from this, it's a little bit difficult. I'm more talking with the mitigation fee. Weymouth got $3 million, Rockland got $1 million, and again, it was paid out over time. What I'm seeing this 100,000 plus maybe, in really out years, we might be able to earn out another 400. I feel that based on your vision, based on the economic, development capability, frankly, based on Starwood's potential that this is a moneymaker, I just think that, you could do a little bit better, to help us out. Because I don't buy when we crossed out here that, obligations have a negative impact on Abington's ability to provide services within its border, which will result in increased costs to Abington and its residents. I don't know who crossed that out. Did you?
We did.
So again, to me, that was kind of a telling statement when I read it today. You're basically saying, you don't feel there's any impact to us. And again, I'd be the first one to say, 12% of the land over there, it's not. But there is a real quality of life concern to us here, and again, to our town departments and service. And I think virtually, did every one of our department heads come back? And, some of them might not be huge, but there are. Even the librarian said, with Abington being sited close to Southfield, having ample parking is going to have an impact, on providing services, because you'll have some people from Southfield coming over there. Now, how big is that? I don't know, but it's something that I think is worth more than 100,000, dollars. So
I
that's just my
understand.
opinion.
No,
I'll let other board members.
But I don't think you can set aside $1.5 million of host community. I mean, I know people do, right? And we spent a lot of times with the other towns. A commitment to honor $1.5 million worth of payments cannot just be set aside. It is real money that we are really going to pay. And so when you look at Rockland's agreement, if you want to look at Rockland's agreement, it is $200,000 and then zero until development occurs. So the comparison is 200 to 100. And then when development occurs, which is exactly what is in your agreement, more mitigation. And so it is a very comparable set of conditions. And I know there's very little time to have this discussion.
Yeah.
I wish we had more time, and we will have more time. We are confident that we will be here for 10 more years with revised legislation. I'll be back before you once a quarter if you want me to be.
But my counter to that would be, 12% of the land, you're going to site, likely, a wastewater treatment plant. How much value is there going to be in residential development up there, where there's a wastewater treatment plant right there? It just is not striking me that there's a big earn-out potential there from any
It's
residential
hundreds of
development.
acres. Wastewater treatment plant is a relatively small footprint that is highly controlled and has really zero, I mean, I know a lot of people want to get excited about it, but the technology for treating waste has changed. And they are just like having, I would rather be next to this wastewater treatment plant than your average DPW yard. There are acreage out there that is available. And some of this benefit is going to come to you, with or without a positive vote
No,
tonight.
I
We're
understand.
bringing you that $1.5 million in the tax revenue. We're excited about it, and it will happen. We wish you would get excited about it and the potential for it, because it is the difference between the legislation doesn't pass, the host community payments go from $1.5 million to zero. The tax revenue goes from another $1.5 million to zero. And the potential for continuing on, growing businesses, providing, recreational fields, stitching this back into your neighborhoods. The people who live adjacent to it will have all these open fields, hiking, biking trails, the ability to just come into this brand-new rec complex and have lowered fees, which has been offered in their package as well. And so we think the town should be excited about it. We think the quality of life goes way up. We think we deleted that because our opinion is 180 degrees away from it. Abington will benefit tremendously, reputationally, lifestyle, tax revenue, income, future prospects. This is a no-brainer. This is a huge potential development for this town. This town should just grab it and run with it.
Are you sure you're not a salesman?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he is a salesman, but he's a good one. We'll give him that.
I had just two questions.
Certainly.
Just back to the $100,000 mitigation number. Where did that come from? How did you come up with that figure?
It was
There must
based
be some
off
rationale
of, it was based off of Rockland's. Rockland had certain impacts they identified, plus the fact that the parkway exits out into Rockland today. There was the removal of a commercial facility to facilitate that completion of the parkway. And so those we weighed and made a commensurate offer that is based on.
How did you develop Abington's figure? How did you come up with $100,000 for Abington?
It was based off of Rockland's. We've had no time. The other two towns, we had a period of 8 months by which to understand and divulge and disclose and discuss impacts and potential impacts, new impacts, more importantly, because we spent a lot of time talking about impacts, but the host community payments were supposed to take care of this development as currently designed, and we're going to build this development as currently designed. So we weighed those, we included those, and then we went and searched for new impacts. What is happening? What has now changed in the municipal responsibility? And so we spent time to come to those numbers. We did not have that time. And so, we would like to take that time. I mean, that is our position. We would like to disconnect the two discussions. And, all of this is an act of faith. Whether you support the legislation or don't support the legislation, if and when it passes, this is an act of faith. I'm believing in this market. I'm believing in this town. I'm a big believer in these three towns combined. We're ready to invest. This facility, to be valuable, requires, I wish I had all my notes, $200 million, $250 million worth of infrastructure, just to make the land valuable. Land isn't valuable unless you can get there. I can't build a house unless there's a road and water and sewer and power. N-Grid doesn't show up on site for free, neither does any of the other utilities. And so there's an investment that's required of that dollar amount. And that speaks to our belief in this project and in these towns. We're asking for the same. If we're going to invest $200 million in you, plus $3 million of direct payments, 3.1, maybe you should give us another month, and let's come to an agreement that satisfies all your concerns and gives us the opportunity to meet with your town in more detail to better understand. Maybe we have not understood the impacts.
Andy,
we're
you had a
open to
second
that.
question? I'm sorry.
I did have a second question. This kind of relates to an email I got today from a gentleman over in Rockland on open space. It is currently advertised on the Southfield website and Welcome Center by Starwood that over 70%, or 1,000 acres of open space and recreation will be preserved. Is that going to continue? Is that still your?
That is what the legislation says, and that is at the sole discretion of the towns after that. But open space is an important part of developing this community. It is a balancing act between a densely sited residential and having amenities for those people to be able to, maybe they don't have the biggest backyard. We're not talking about 2-acre, 3-acre, I have my own big backyard, nobody can see me. This is a community more tightly stitched together that then has an enormous shared backyard, of acres and acres of open space that is for them to use, and for the residents of Abington to use.
And that's a long-range vision of this development still?
It is.
Because I'm going to take you at your word that that is the case.
Well, open space is a very important part. It is currently zoned. The zoning is being placed over the top of it, and that is, that's the way the rules work.
Thank you.
Rick?
Just a couple of points, and first of all, I think to speak to Tom's point a little bit, and I agree that sometimes, the percentage of land does not necessarily equate to the percentage of impact. So 12% of the land mass doesn't mean it's not bearing more of a brunt on its services than the other partners in this. So I think there is certainly some rationale to the fact that there may be some additional service needs. Our police and fire chief had pointed out some of their concerns, and particularly with as it was pointed out, the issues regard to mutual aid as development grows in other communities, the service needs that are generated in Abington also grow, whether or not there's development in Abington. So, the model for determining what exactly how you measure impacts is imperfect, to say the least. And the fact that obviously we haven't had the same time that has been taken in our neighboring communities to meet and to deal with this issue has not helped this. On the other hand, to the extent that there's some proposal, and while I don't have any reason to doubt the good faith Mr. Barry's presenting in terms of whether there's an MOA that's agreed to before the legislation passes or later isn't going to change their approach to this. I think there's a common sense element that suggests that the town, if it's inclined to be supportive, should find a way to do it before the Thursday evening, if not tonight, whether or not that's possible, I don't know. But while I appreciate the good faith, and I have no reason to doubt that, I do think there's a practical reality, and we have legislators who believe the same thing, and that's why they're waiting for phone calls tonight to see how this meeting goes, so.
Maureen, do you have something? No? Okay. Mike, sorry.
Yeah, just a couple things. I'm probably not 100% clear on this, and you've done a very nice job. I appreciate that, but yeah, I think all of our skepticisms come from however many years ago that we were inundated with mail about what was going to happen down here, and a lot of promises, and not much came out of it in the end for a lot of different reasons. But I'm not going to go there. I don't think it all falls on one person's shoulders or one thing. It was just the way things went. But I just want to be very clear. You're looking for our support in the legislation. Is that fair to say tonight? You want us to support the legislation tonight. That's basically.
I would like you to support the legislation tonight. I'd like to start a 10 to 15-year relationship tonight.
Correct. And I, along with Mr. Dion, think that, this is Abington. You made the statement, it's going from Rockland, that the mitigation, we might be able to look at doing a little bit better on that. If we were to support your legislation, the vote of the board, and I don't know, you might have mentioned this. Rick, you mentioned having this mitigation settled before the legislation goes through, or would we have the potential to negotiate this mitigation fund after you tell me, I mean, you tell me what you want, it's your, the ball's in your court, but I just want to know, if we gave you the support for the legislation, and we didn't have to do all these whereases, which you already told me we don't, to bind the town, and the one issue that, in my mind, would be left on the table would be the mitigation, whether we accepted what you have on the table right now, or would it be potential that we could sit and negotiate, probably not before Thursday, because I don't think we have enough time to post meetings and do everything like that. And I think you certainly have conducted yourself, in my eyes, as a person that's going to keep their word and you know, do the right thing. So could we negotiate this mitigation package after the legislation, if we gave you the support?
There's no linkage between the legislation and negotiating the mitigation package.
Would that, I mean, that's, okay, fine.
I mean, we would like to take the time to address, we think the mitigation package should be fair and should pay for the impacts to the town. And we would like the opportunity to sit and go through those to better understand them.
When the officials in Rockland sat with you, you got a flavor of what they wanted and stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously they were looking out for the best interests of their town. I just personally feel that we haven't been able to do that with you guys,
Mm-hmm.
and our needs are different, and I would like to have the opportunity to maybe discuss that, but Kenny's going to glare at me, and he's done, and I appreciate the work you've done, Kenny, on this. It's been awesome, but, okay, that's fine, thank you.
Anything else, Dad?
I think we chewed on it pretty hard.
So maybe suggested,
I just have, I have total respect for your comments, Mike, but I think good faith comes from a relationship over a period of time, and I don't think, and again, as you know, this works both ways. You don't know us, we don't know you, that I don't think the town's ability to, and I'm not sure what the right words are, but to demonstrate impact sufficient to the model south that the developer has used to date is going to increase before the legislation is passed. And I don't think that our ability to exact additional accommodations is going to increase after legislation's passed. That's my feeling. It's an opinion only, and it's, again, not has nothing to do with the character of the people we're dealing with.
No, I
Just
completely agree. You should be, questioning, right? Developers, lawyers, lots of people should be questioning. I won't say politicians. Developers, lawyers, certainly.
Politicians.
So, here, let me just play out a hypothetical for you. Legislation passes.
Can I just interrupt you for a
Oh,
second?
sir,
'Cause I'm gonna
absolutely.
I'm going to see if we can't maybe propose some kind of compromise here.
Unless he's proposing compromise.
Are you
Well,
proposing a compromise?
Let me just offer this
All
to
right,
you
go
for you
ahead.
to consider. Legislation passes Thursday, right? We all hope that. There is no agreement. And your concern comes true. I don't answer your calls, even though I come here frequently. And that happens, right? Critical path to developing this project is a wastewater treatment plant. Critical path to my ability to build anything above 1,000 residential units, which I'm going to close on land sales within the next 30 days. Maybe Robin won't agree to that. Robin's working on the land sales more than me. But we're closing land sales to get to 1,000 homes. Our development potential runs through wastewater treatment plant in your town. So I have never been in a circumstance where the town feels like I have leverage. Now, this has been new, because all three towns thought somehow this legislation was going to grant me, I will get taller somehow. Maybe I'll get, somehow, right?
Well, I
But
think it's-
we cannot proceed with this development without a wastewater treatment plant. It's in your town. It's your decision. So I can either make a deal with you today, get your support, maybe not make a deal with you today and get rejected and not get your support. And that may affect the legislation, in which case you could be looking at being the cause of Southfield not going forward. That's a potential, this is a hypothetical circumstance.
Yeah.
Mr. Burbine?
Taking a hole there.
That's it.
So, you've reviewed this, Greg, right? And their changes, are they acceptable except for these issues we have with the mitigation of it, do you think? That there's some small changes that they made wording-wise, are any of those going to have any major impact versus what was there before?
From the legal perspective, most of the changes go to the amount of mitigation that you're getting. What we talked about earlier today was having the language revised a bit more to make it clear that obligations under the existing agreement carry forward to this agreement, and, to ensure that you get payment for your attorney's fees. Otherwise, it's really in your court to decide whether what you're being promised here is sufficient mitigation for you.
I understand that.
Okay.
I'm just more concerned with their small wording changes as to whether or not that substantially changes anything
No,
that we
it-
had down there previously.
In my opinion, after we spoke today, in my opinion, they do not.
Okay. So, hold on. So why couldn't we do, and this is a proposal, why couldn't we say we accept the agreement with the provision that, at a minimum, these mitigation of impacts are what we would get at a minimum, but that you and Kenny and Rick would continue to negotiate for the next however long it takes to see if, so you get a clearer picture of what our concerns are. We can maybe get a clearer picture of what your concerns are, and maybe this changes the mitigation, but it would never go below where it stands right now.
I would agree to that.
I don't know if that's something that the rest of the board would be willing to do, but.
Mike?
I initially started this with my concerns about harnessing the town with this memorandum of agreement, because, like you, Matt, most of it is good faith. I don't think it has to be written. It's a business decision. It's whether you're successful or we're successful. I don't really see anything in this MOA that isn't good faith, except for, like, there are some issues, talking about the sewer board, we talked about that. I don't want to get involved with, the water. We've always had a great relationship with the town of Rockland, but every single time an article comes before our town meeting, it's X amount of dollars with a like amount from the town of Rockland. And, disproportionately, it would be a lot of water on their side. It would be something we'd have to work out, and I don't know if the language harnesses us. I'm not sure. I'm not comfortable with voting the memorandum of agreement. I am very comfortable with voting to support the legislation, and I'm equally comfortable, if it doesn't go any less, to just having us get together and see if we can't do a little bit better on the MOA. I'd support that part of it, but whatever the board wants is fine by me.
I think there's some things in here we want.
Yes.
We want the attorney's fees paid. I don't want to leave that.
Okay, well, let's X them out.
That's why I suggested.
Okay.
No, and I also think, and I don't want to understate this, that it's, to me, commemorating the existing host community
Right,
agreement.
I think that's very important.
is huge,
Yes.
because, and we've had discussions about it today even, that there's language in the legislation that is confusing as to what that means. And
Yes.
and we don't want to, and none of us want to rely upon, a relationship in the future that may or may not be as positive as that seems to be right now, to figure out what that means. So there's a lot of, to what you're suggesting, Mr. Burbine, I think there's a lot of value to that, and to the extent that there's an agreement moving forward to work in good faith to document any additional costs, mitigation costs, I think is, in light of the timetable, I don't know that the selectmen can possibly put yourselves in a better position in light of the timetable.
Maureen?
Just a comment or opinion from me. I currently, right this minute, I would be comfortable, as we've discussed, supporting the legislation. I really like what Andy had to say by having a memorandum agreement on the books with the potential of continuing negotiation, but at least having something in the can.
I certainly don't mind,
Like that.
some of the things you're talking about, and I thought we could negotiate that afterwards, is what we started with earlier. That it wasn't just saying no to it, it was just that I personally haven't had enough time. I certainly respect your opinion. And some of the things, yeah, I could see, but some of the things that harness the town as far as water goes, you have to understand something, Matt. The people in Abington, technically, we can't even wash our cars. And to look for water for Southfield, where they're watering the lawns, as irrigation, is a little bit much for us to swallow. Now, that's
Maybe-
probably not
There's
going to
nothing in
happen.
this agreement
Yeah,
that ties us to
that-
water.
No, but it does mention,
Our ability to go and request for proposal.
Right,
But
right.
it
But
doesn't tie us currently.
we don't, and you can explain this, we don't have any control over that. That's the joint waterworks who has
Oh, I
control.
understand that.
So.
And
the
that's
fact that
because
it's in
we
here-
asked for that. We added the joint waterworks to this.
You did?
Yeah, that was
That's
ours.
us. We added that because it was
Unclear, in Rockland's, it was very unclear.
Can you explain that a little bit to Mike, maybe?
Well, sure. So, the provisions in the agreement, the way they were originally proposed to us, was that the town of Abington would have the ability to make a proposal to supply water to the Abington portion of the project. However, in discussions with various town officials, it's my understanding that Abington in and of itself doesn't have that sole authority and control. That authority and control lies with the joint waterworks. So the way that the agreement is written now is that the joint waterworks has the opportunity, but not the obligation, to make a proposal to supply water to the Southfield development. If the joint waterworks decides not to make that proposal, then they have to go somewhere else to get their water.
Okay, I misunderstood you, because I thought you said the way the Rockland agreement was read, that they could, on its own, get water from the joint waterworks.
Well, again, that's the way their agreement is written, but I don't know that they have the ability
And
to
that's
do that.
That's what I'm afraid of.
Legislation doesn't change.
Yeah, I mean, so they're, even though, in my opinion, even though Rockland is saying Rockland can make a proposal to supply water to Rockland, in my opinion, that's ineffectual, because Rockland does not have the legal authority to supply water, that it has to go through the joint waterworks.
Yeah, I mean, we will work with Rockland. That could have been, our error in drafting. The specific names and the functionality of the Abington-Rockland Joint Waterworks is not something that we were knowledgeable about, and so we wrote a right of first offer in a manner that we thought was correct, now your attorneys have clarified that for us, and so we will likely go back and talk with Rockland about that same clarification, because, ultimately, if there is not a desire to provide water, we are providing water. We are going to make a connection of additional water supply, and so we don't want that to be a concern. If it's a concern, we'll pull it right out. We're happy to go get water from the Quabbin Reservoir.
Potentially, Mike, that doesn't even have to be in there if we don't want it in there. We just,
I didn't have a good understanding of how that got in there. I apologize, I wasn't at the last
Yeah.
meeting, and so it was a concern of mine. Rick and I had attended way back when a meeting down in Weymouth where water and sewer was discussed, and at that time, Mr. Callahan, expressed that he had the permits in there, but it probably wasn't going to be available, so, when you wrote this in here and it had to be done, and put it on a fast track and everything like that, I did have a concern, so that's fine.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Franny. My understanding is that that's in there because Rockland requested it, and Rockland viewed the ability to make a proposal to provide water as a benefit. If you don't see that as being a benefit to Abington, there is no reason for it to be in this
Greg, I
agreement.
probably do under the right conditions. I think it could be negotiated in there if something happened, and I just didn't want to, again, I use the word harness the town with something we had agreed to, because from a business standpoint, I know we want to work with you. We have every desire, and so if we had extra water capacity, and maybe desalination or something like that, we could look to infiltrate some, whatever, we'd have to agree to as a town, but I just didn't want to have something that would come back and bite us later.
It's really your sole discretion. The joint waterworks says yes, or they say no, and then we move on with a different plan.
Right.
Are you accepting public comments tonight, or is this?
I will be. I didn't see anybody with their hands up, and Joe will have his hand up. All right. Does anybody else have anything to say before we open it up to the floor? Okay. Joe, you want to come up to the microphone, please?
Thank you very much.
thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Matt.
Joseph Shea, 3 Wyman Road, Abington. The Abington's representative on the advisory board. Also, I've been involved in the project for many years. As I've expressed before, you people have a difficult decision to make tonight. I have deep concerns about both the legislation, as I've read it, and I haven't seen the most recent versions, and especially the way it was presented and developed without joint meetings and planning between the Starwood and the three towns. I believe that the fact that this was not done, and also it can create serious problems for town governments and their residents. For example, the comment in the paper today that Weymouth will see a loss in revenues, which will be offset by mitigation for the first 4 years of the project. Obviously, we now have the concern about, there is a potential for residential development in Abington, which obviously has to consider schools. I think it's going to be incumbent upon the towns and their citizens, as with any large ongoing project such as this, to continue to monitor closely and give our opinions on what is happening in the Southfield project. There will be issues, for example, the zoning changes. There will be requirements, I think, on the present zoning process, Starfield has to fund much of that work, so that's going to need to be worked out. There's also going to be questions on what do we want to have up there. It's going to require a good deal of planning, which Abington's going to have to find a way to have funded in one way or another. Again, possibly involving Starwoods, as to how we figure out what our best needs are up there, and our issues with if there's any impacts on the schools, or there's impact on police and fire. So I have major concerns, and that may be me, but just based on my experience, I do that. If the legislation passes and Starwood's plan is implemented, I hope obviously they're successful, as they believe. This will, I hope my concerns are proved wrong. It will be, if so, it will be very beneficial. I still think we need to be very active as a town, and all the towns need to be, in what is happening. Conditions are going to come up which were not anticipated and were not really, or may not have been discussed fully. There may be quirks in legislation which nobody's going to think of until it happens. There's going to be problems come up. So I think with that, those are my statements as it is. I have my concerns. I have serious concerns I've had since it started. It's up to you to decide what to do. I mean, if the legislation passes, I hope everything goes well. Better than I hope. Better than I expect. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
Now, was that a motion, Mr. Burbank?
Yeah, I would make a motion that we express our support for the legislation proposed by Starwood, and that we accept this memorandum of agreement with my recommended change.
What was your recommended change?
That the mitigation impacts at a minimum are what are in here now, but that Rick, Kenny, Town Council, Dory continue to negotiate for the next 30 days. So both sides get a clearer understanding of what impacts are actually going to be taking place as a result of this development. And again, I'm taking Matt at his word. He's a man of his word, I'm sure. And if there are changes that need to be made, he'll come back and change it and increase the mitigation payments or the...
So if after 30 days there's no movement and discussion, then...
No, if you want to... I'm not sold on the 30 days. If it takes longer than 30 days, if it's 60 days, I don't care.
But however many days, if negotiation breaks down and there's no additional mitigation payment, it stands as is what you're saying. You're willing to do that, okay.
I am.
Through you, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Might I throw out a form of motion for your consideration?
Before you go,
Yep.
there were a couple legislative amendments we wanted to discuss, too. I don't know if we should wait till after this, or the liquor licenses and the makeup of the board. We had some concerns about that, as did Rockland. I don't know if we want to discuss that afterwards, or how that would fall into your motion that you're recommending.
It's kind of outside the MOA, but...
I mean, if we want to discuss this afterwards, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure our legislature knew what amendments we would like as a board. We did discuss at least 2 or 3, I think, at our last meeting.
Well, through you, Mr. Chair, you are voting tonight to support legislation, and since our last meeting, we did work on several suggested amendments to that legislation, and so before we move to a final vote on the agreement, I would suggest that you talk through those proposed amendments and come to an agreement amongst yourselves as to whether you want those amendments in the legislation you support, or whether there are even other amendments that you might require in that legislation before you pledge your support.
Does the board remember, I believe we had recommended 2 liquor licenses, is that correct? And I believe we wanted to somehow make sure that Abington was represented with more than one member, one voting member out of the 9. So I'm not sure how we can change the makeup of the board or recommend. I think, sorry, Matt, do you remember what Rockland is putting, they have an amendment, don't they, for the makeup of the board, too?
I do believe there's negotiation. I think but the amendments are really now between your delegation representatives and the others. And so I have not been up to date on where Rockland's delegation has worked it out with Weymouth's delegation as to the board representation. But if you want to make recommendations to your representatives, there is still some finite amount of time for them to be incorporated.
I mean, we could still recommend the legislation and request that our amendments be added to it, not that they wouldn't be binding, but and I don't even know if that's going to require a vote, but I mean, we discussed it at our last meeting. I think we voted as part of our vote to liquor licenses and better representation, and it's kind of a bland subject, but I think the way it stands now is Rockland and Abington combined have more than 50% of the property, but yet they only have combined 3 votes out of the 9. I believe that's the way it was.
So, through you, Mr. Chair, I did, based on our meeting last week, I did prepare a document. I don't know if you've all seen it or not, but I can walk you through this, like, I think 4 changes that are recommended. So,
why didn't you do this earlier instead of letting me flounder up
sorry.
here?
Yeah, no, this is the legislation. So the first one comes in section 9 relative to the composition of the board. And the way the board is proposed to be constituted, Abington would have 1 vote out of 9. And so in order to, provide Abington with a greater voice at the table, I suggested language that says, notwithstanding the preceding or any other provision of this special act or general special law, the Abington member shall be permitted to speak at least 1 time on any matter prior to it being put to a final vote, provided, however, that this sentence shall not prohibit the board from voting on a matter if the Abington member is absent and has not yet spoken on a matter. So it doesn't increase your your role or number of votes on the board, but at least it ensures that your voice is literally heard before any vote is taken.
I mean, is that agreeable to the board, or we want to add in conjunction with trying to get another member? I mean,
It'd be nice to get another member, but
Yeah, I don't think.
I don't think it's going to be, at this point.
I don't think so either. Okay.
My question, though, is who, if this goes forward, each town would collect their own taxes,
Yes.
right? Yes. Okay, so from a board perspective, you've got representatives from each board. Who pays for the cost of that board? Would Abington have to pay its prorated share for the 1/9 member?
For the
No.
new
The reconstituted board's
Yeah.
role, effectively, is a planning board. And so what their role is to approve development plans as of right. Which, I don't mean to be aggressive, just
no,
if we're proposing to do something that is zoned the way it is shown, then they have the authority to approve it. If we are making any zoning changes, those have to come back to the town where the land resides, so Abington in this case. The payment for the board is primarily through the entitlement fees that we still have to pay. There's also what has been called a Southfield buffer, a rate that is added to the top of the tax rate paid by the residents exclusively in Southfield.
Okay.
That are used to pay for some amenities that are funded through the authority, South Shore Tri-Town, as it's reconstituted. And so you could think of that almost as a homeowners association. There are functions that the whole neighborhood benefits from that are routed through Tri-Town, and then other than that, their function as zoning is paid through entitlement fees and permit fees.
So you would pay for any stipends that that planning board would be collecting, and if they're eligible for any benefits like medical or whatever, this entitlement fee would pay for that also. Abington wouldn't be on the hook for any sort of those benefits.
Abington will pay nothing for the
Okay.
South Shore Tri-Town Board unless you're a resident of Abington who lives in Southfield,
Yeah.
or business owner or other. But the town of Abington will not be obligated to pay any of those.
Thank you.
Matt, I just want to be very clear. Right now in your master plan, it does not show any development on the town of Abington except for a sewer, a possibility if the permits for a sewer treatment plant.
Correct, and some passive and active
And in your
recreation.
estimation, that sewer treatment plant would run somewhere between $30 and $40 million?
Those are the estimates we've heard.
Okay, and that would be a tax revenue?
Taxable.
Taxable, okay.
I would expect you to tax it, yes.
Yes.
Believe me, we will.
And Mr. Coyle was looking for a liquor permit for that building?
It might not be wise.
Trying to plan ahead, I know. We got a few years left in us. Were the other amendments?
Yep, so that was the first one. The second amendment addresses the concern you raised about the tax base in Abington and the potential for commercial development. So in Section 14, Section B, with relation to the termination of the reuse plan, it says the commercial minimum, the residential maximum, and the senior housing minimum shall remain in effect. And I suggested adding, provided, however, that a portion of the commercial development may be sited within the Abington portion of the site if Abington approves a major zoning change in accordance with this section. So this gives you the express authority to rezone a portion of your property to commercial so that some of that commercial development can go into Abington.
Any concerns about that, or?
No, I mean, we
Right, we were talking about that anyways, so, all right.
I would make a motion that we suggest that change be made to the legislation.
I'll second that part of it.
Motion made and seconded. Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous on that amendment. Number 3?
So number 3 relates to the procedure for affecting zoning changes. Under the prior version of the special act, there was sort of a unified vision of what the whole Southfield development would look like, and any major zoning change would have to be approved by all 3 towns. The way it's written now is each town has independent authority to conduct its own zoning and to rezone its own portion. And concerns were expressed as to, well, how do we maintain that single unified vision? So what I suggested was, with respect to the zoning change, a sentence be added that says, prior to submittal of any major zoning revision to the town council in Weymouth or the town meetings in Abington or Rockland, the authority shall publish a notice of public hearing in a newspaper of general circulation within the NAS South Weymouth region and hold at least one public hearing in the NAS South Weymouth redevelopment area or in any one of the towns at which public hearing shall be afforded the opportunity to comment on the proposed revision. So it just sort of makes sure that you know, if anyone is going to do a zoning change, everyone gets notice of it and has an opportunity to comment.
Any members of the board want to speak on that?
I think it's,
Matthew, do you have any problems with that, or?
no issue with that.
Okay.
I'd make the same motion that we support that as an amendment to
I'll second.
legislation.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous?
Okay, and one more. With respect to liquor licenses, it currently provides that Weymouth is authorized to issue a maximum of 13 alcoholic beverages licenses, and Rockland is authorized to issue a maximum of 2. I suggest adding, the town of Abington is authorized to issue a maximum of 2 alcoholic beverage licenses within the portion of NAF South Weymouth redevelopment area located within Abington in accordance with Chapter 138 of the general laws. And later on, it says that said licenses shall not diminish the number of licenses permitted by the Commonwealth to be granted elsewhere within the town of Abington.
On board with that?
Any problem with that matter?
Okay. Somebody besides Andy make a motion.
I'll motion.
Motion made.
Second.
Motion made and second. Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. We didn't take a vote on number one. Do we want to just go with his wording, or do we want to try to push for another representative? I mean, we can always ask, but or we can just...
But if we, I was going to say, if we seek another one, then we're 2 of 10 instead of 1 of 9. We continue
Right.
to dilute by making a larger, unless we're going to steal one from Weymouth, which I don't think anyone's going to give that up.
Do you remember the makeup, Kenny, of the
Yeah.
residents?
2
So
residents from
just two?
Southfield.
So there was 3 from Weymouth, 2 from
Four
South.
from Weymouth, and was
Four
that
from
include a
Weymouth?
union rep?
Yeah, there was a labor.
5 total from
You
Weymouth.
guys-
So the way it goes right now is 1 member from Abington, 2 members from Rockland, 2 members from Weymouth, 1 experienced labor representative selected by the mayor of Weymouth, 2 members who have legal residency in NAS South Weymouth, selected by the mayor of Weymouth, 1 member who shall be a member of the board of the South Shore Chamber of Commerce.
To me, that seems to be fair.
Weymouth gets 5.
Just really quick, I know that has been amended, so the actual people, I think is accurate, how they are selected, I think has been amended, and I don't have that directly in front of me, so. The labor is the direct appointee from labor.
Oh, it's not from the mayor
Not
anymore.
One of the 2 residents is from the Southfield Residents Association, not the mayor. The second resident is mutual from the Rockland Board of Selectmen and the mayor.
Oh.
Nominated from a pool of 4 by the Southfield Resident Association.
So Rockland and Weymouth get to deliberate on one of the appointees out of
The resident
the
nominated by the
resident. Why
Residents
couldn't we
Association.
be part of that deliberation, too?
So it's like an at-large representative, right?
I think all of those discussions have been amongst the delegation. We are aware of some of the outcomes, not how they came to be, so that would be,
Yeah.
I
Maybe we
I
can
didn't
suggest
participate in that.
that representative that gets appointed.
Another country you heard from.
Matt, I apologize. Bill Ryan with, handle government affairs for Starwood. On this point, Mr. Chairman, through you to the members, that as of, I want to say 6:30 this evening, this particular issue, the way I believe this will be articulated by bills in third reading tomorrow when this is released, is that additional representative who is contemplated to be nominated by the mayor and the chairman of the Rockland Board of Selectmen, if they cannot agree, then the respective candidates they were each deliberating over would be selected by the board. So I just wanted to, yeah, it has to do with.
Which board?
The new board. So, yeah. And the only other thing I would say on this is as Matt indicated, there's no issues with Starwood on these amendments. Time is,
Yes.
it is going to be very, I just don't want anybody to think that these are going to be able to get into this bill incarnate tomorrow just because of timing. You've got an excellent state senator, you've got a very good state representative, they've been fantastic in this, but this literally has 48 hours to pass, is going to leave the House tomorrow. So we'll do everything we can, but then, of course, there will be subsequent vehicles that something could be amended by, and the stuff you're talking about is not controversial, so I don't think it would be a problem to have that go through.
Controversial stuff yet.
That was it, right?
I think it could be adopted at informal session, is my only point.
Can I ask you one more question? I don't know if you know the answer to this. I had a concern long ago about the quorum.
Yeah.
Is that still the same for affirmative votes? Or
I think so. Read that again, sir.
So 5 members of the board shall constitute a quorum.
Correct.
It's a 9-member board, 5 constitute a quorum. but
And
in
4
order-
of the 5 are necessary to do business.
Necessary to pass something?
Yeah,
Is that the okay? Because we had that
historically,
conversation, Robin, long ago, you and I did. That's- Stays the
Yeah,
same.
historically, for those of you who've followed it for a while, Dory, I know you know this well, there have been occasions where you've had a majority of the board, but a supermajority quorum that's been required, and you cannot conduct business. It doesn't happen that often, but when it does, it's become a problem on a project that is marketed as having fast-track permitting approval and stuff like that, and when suddenly things like that happen, through no fault of anyone's, it's just the structure of it, it gets in the way of the marketability of the project.
Wouldn't that make it more difficult for you to get something passed if you need 4 votes out of the 5?
No, because you gotta have some floor.
I understand that.
You're not gonna want it with 3.
I just was never clear why it wouldn't be just a
Yeah,
simple
yeah.
majority of whatever.
Well, because I suspect that the mayor in Weymouth would start to have a heart attack if you said a quorum is 3.
Thank you.
Don't quote me on that.
Quick question, and I agree with organized labor should have a seat in the Chamber of Commerce. Is there any provision in there to state that they couldn't come from one of the towns? I mean, to give it an unfair majority, say they both came from Weymouth, for instance. You'd have the majority. It wouldn't really be a good makeup, so to speak. Not that but would that not be a concern going down the road? Is to make that, put something in there that would say that they can't, not necessarily whether they're
Hope
doing
they
it
would
right or
police
wrong.
themselves, I would think that,
I would hope so too, but then some people, when we know that they get involved in the political process, want to do a little bit of railroading, and, whatever, I don't care, just bring it up.
Well, if you want to make a motion, we can try, yeah.
I don't know, I mean.
As we suggested, it's going to be difficult for any of these to get through at this point in time, but we could at least
Yeah,
express our
probably.
concern.
What do you think, Greg?
I
Probably
mean,
not worth it, or?
At the minimum, I'd like to endorse what Greg said.
Yeah.
Put that
Yeah.
as our amendment.
I agree with
At least
that.
we'll have a voice heard, and if the board so wishes, I'd like to get these amendments to our state representative as soon as possible, whether it be tonight or tomorrow, and I will reiterate that we would like to try to get a little more.
Well, that's fine, if you don't think it's important, I'll let it go, I just wanted to bring it up.
If you want
You want to make a motion?
I would like to make a motion.
What's it gonna be?
See my colleagues vote it down, so.
We're not going to vote it down. I don't
What's
think
it
it's a
gonna
bad
be?
idea.
Yeah, it just, I don't know what the right wording is, but I have a concern if you just put something in there, and you're right, it probably isn't gonna go anywhere, but at least we tried.
So what would it be, Mike?
Yeah, what is it? I don't know what you...
That
Well,
the
you're gonna make
appointed,
it, you're gonna get like 3 or 4 from Weymouth, whatever it is, and my concern is you're gonna get one from organized labor, that's fine. And then you're gonna get one from the Chamber of Commerce, there's 2. So if you put them from Weymouth residents, if you appointed them and they're Weymouth residents, Weymouth would have a disproportional amount of votes.
to, is the Plymouth County Chamber of Commerce?
so sure.
So sure, that doesn't include Weymouth though, does it?
Yeah.
It does?
So, I mean, for what it's worth, I
Who is
don't
not a
think that's good
resident,
politics.
who
I
is
don't
not
think
a
it's good.
resident of Weymouth. Who is not a resident of Weymouth.
Yeah, fine. Not a resident of, any one of the 3 towns to give it to.
Okay, that's fine. Make your,
Right.
all
Who's not a resident of any of the 3 towns?
Correct.
Gotcha.
Just to be fair.
right, that's good.
Restate this, 'cause now, yeah.
So
got me
the
confused.
appointee from the
Chamber of
South Shore
Commerce.
Chamber of Commerce and from the Labor
Organized
Council
labor.
will not be a resident of any of the 3 towns that are in South Shore Tri-Town.
Correct.
I'll second that.
Okay? Because the labor should represent labor in the Chamber of
Yeah,
Commerce
not
business.
necessarily
and
the
you're
town.
fine there.
And do you want to add that to the amendment that he's proposing, so it'll all be one amendment?
You tell us what's easiest, Greg.
What? All right, so we'll vote on your amendment now. So there's a motion made and second. Any further discussion on Mike's amendment? All in favor?
All right.
Aye.
I'm opposed, just because it's kind of strange. And now, now this amendment, do we want to vote on that Abington has a voice, even if we only have one vote?
So moved.
Second.
Motion made and second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Now, we still have to vote on
My original motion.
Mr. Burbine's original motion, which I'm sure you remember
I will
exactly.
No, actually, Greg had a
Oh, yes.
suggested.
Oh, yes, we're back to
motion
that.
that he give to us.
For discussion purposes, I move that the board vote to approve the proposed memorandum of agreement, subject to the addition of language acceptable to Mr. Burbine to require the parties to continue to work in good faith to increase Abington's mitigation payments, provided that said payments shall never be below that stated in the current version.
So moved.
Motion's made.
I'd like to second it, but actually, I would like to amend it to take the water portion out of it, but I don't think my colleagues would support that, but I'll try that. I'll second Mr. Burbine's amendment, but I'd like to, but I'd like to amend it to take the water portion out of it.
So you're making a motion to take that first part, dealing with the water.
Dealing with the water and just, again, just my gut feeling. I
think it actually protects us in case Rockland does try to, so I disagree.
Would you say it protects, hurts, or doesn't hurt? As long as we have the protection, I'm
It's in the Rockland
okay.
agreement, so if we don't put it, I don't think there's anything bad or good having it in or not, but it's in theirs. So I would personally feel
okay.
comfortable it's in ours.
I think the amendment that we added, Abington, Rockland
Yeah.
Joint Waterworks, protects us, and I don't think we're under any obligation. Or, I shouldn't say we, the Abington, Rockland Joint Waterworks is
All right.
to accept or
That's
make
fine.
proposals or
Just
whatever.
for the sake of time, I'll remove that amendment and second Mr. Burbine's.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? One opposed.
Why would you oppose it?
So, anything else we
We
need?
also have to make an amendment to support the legislation, because we just approved.
Was that part of your motion?
I don't think it
We
was.
didn't
Well,
say
by
it out
accepting
loud.
the agreement, you're supporting the legislation. Why don't we have a second motion that says that we vote to support we vote to authorize, we vote to submit the amendments voted on tonight to our legislative delegation for approval, but we support the legislation whether those amendments are added or not.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Tom, do you want to make that motion?
I'll make that motion. You want?
I'll second that.
Second it.
Motion's made and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
And I just want to be clear,
Wait.
Opposed? Tom, one. Okay, one opposed. All right, go ahead. You want to be clear?
just be clear, the memorandum agreement is all set. We discussed it, we gave it a good talk. We're all in agreement that we have protected the town. And we have not settled in on mitigation fees yet, which we're subject to.
We have a low.
At the minimum.
Baseline.
At the minimum.
Baseline.
It can
It can only go up.
get better, so you remember.
We
when you get
expect
that
it,
raise
and we
back,
expect it
Bob,
will.
You know, all right, I'm fine with that.
Any other business we should be conducting tonight, or are we all set? Okay.
I think we've had enough for tonight.
Reminder that we have a meeting on Monday, right?
Monday, yes.
Monday, big meeting Monday.
Joint meeting with schools.
We'll make the motion
We
to
have a
adjourn.
meeting on Monday.
Motion made to,
Second that.
all in favor?
Yeah, we went down there.
Thank you.
Right, thank you.